imagination is built in the heart of science.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah.
And I feel as if, and as you know, I take this approach with Doorway to Artistry too. Here's one thing that philosophy can do for artistry, and that is fix everybody's epistemology. The sun is still coming in. All right.
Oh,
all right. There we go.
There we go.
Because it's not the case. Artists, all artists, lots of artists are liable to say, I have to set reason aside
Mm-hmm.
and embrace imagination. I'm saying, no!
You're right. Yeah.
We want to say science needs to set reason aside so discovery can happen.
My guest today on Grail Country is a philosopher, Esther Lightcap Meek. Esther is known for her work in covenant epistemology, which is her theory of how we come to know and the knowing process. And she has recently written her first book on metaphysics called Doorway to Artistry. This is her first work on the topic of metaphysics, and I invited Esther to come on to Grail Country today and talk to us about it. So, with no further ado, welcome to Grail Country, Esther.
Well, thank you. You're going to have to tell me where I am.
Sure, absolutely. So,
Grail Country sounds like Southern England. I noticed your email is Sir Parsival. So
yeah.
Arthurian, Southern.
I've always been something of a big Arthurian nerd for my whole life. Like since I first read Arthurian stories in collections for children as a young boy. Mm-hmm. Some of the very first things I read actually were tales of King Arthur and his knights. So I've had a lifelong interest in Arthuriana, so the name Grail Country. The reason I fell on that name is actually there's a very odd line in Wagner's Parsifal where Gurnemanz is talking about the region of the Grail, and he says here time becomes space. Ooh. And so the region of the Grail, calling the channel region of the Grail didn't really work, but calling it Grail Country kind of captures the same idea of like when you approach the region of the Grail thing or Grail Country, things begin to be different. And so that's where I got the idea for the name. I started the channel because a friend of mine named Michael, who has appeared in many of the videos in the past, although he's had a baby and has been busy with his new baby, and he hasn't been participating as much as he used to. He insisted that I do it. He really, really wanted me to start a channel. He was like, Nate, it's like you're always reading the most interesting things, and you have the most interesting things to say. You need to start a YouTube channel.
That's lovely.
And so I did. And so I invite the people who I find interesting to come on and talk to me about their ideas, which I have found interesting. And so I've invited you.
It's so fun to think of it as Grail Country, and here we are on Maundy Thursday. If a time were a space, today would be it.
Yeah. It's funny. I'll just. This is a very Grail Country way to open the conversation. And sometimes I open conversations with kind of like weird, unexpected questions or observations. But I really found some of the most interesting parts of your work, which I've read in preparation for our conversation today, was I found particularly your conversation about things to be very enlightening and a little different than what I've read before, and somewhat surprising. And the entire time during that section of the book, I kept coming back to the poem "So Much Depends Upon a Red Wheelbarrow," because that poem so perfectly captures the way that you're talking about things.
Okay, and you're going to have to refresh my memory. I know I've heard the title.
Oh, it's a very short little poem. I'd be happy to recite it for you. It's so much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glistening with rainwater beside the white chickens. That's the entire poem.
Oh boy!
And what it does, it calls attention to the wonder of ordinary things in the way that you talk about.
So who wrote the poem?
I believe it is actually. I want to say it's not William Carlos Williams. Hold on a second.
That's all right. That's what Google's for.
Red Wheelbarrow is William Carlos Williams. I was wrong. I should have trusted my instinct.
I have a colleague who loves William Carlos Williams. She did her dissertation, I think, on his work. So maybe that's why I heard this before.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you so much for saying that, because you may or may not realize how much courage and growth it took me in my life to get to the place to be able to voice that. I mean, I've worked hard on it, and for me, it is a new country, back to the Grail Country, and at one point early on, I felt like, this is going to take a conversion, and somehow it happened. So now I can't see it any other way, and I'm very at home with it. So praise be, but. Yes, I'm totally down with the red wheelbarrow.
Well, I think because I think it took extraordinary courage, because I think it's and you point this out in your book, and you're completely right. It's like the distinction between thing and object is one that is very difficult for us to make as moderns. Mm-hmm. Like, we tend to think of objects like automatically, that's what we kind of default to. Yeah. So to get people to understand that distinction between a thing and an object is going to take some doing. And I think you've done it excellently. I mean, I just you're really unique in that you just have a way of bringing philosophical topics to regular people in such plain and clear language that is
may it be.
Very unusual and very commendable.
And not just ordinary language. I mean, I'm really trying to do that, and when you're writing a book, that's what you have to work with. But our the lives where we are, bringing it there, because that just, I don't know, it's so obvious to me. It's like, this is my world,
But obvious things can be really hard to articulate.
Yeah, yes, and that's why philosophy is difficult for everybody, even though it's meant for everybody, I think.
Yeah.
Because we're not used to voicing these things, and when we do voice them, just think about this. This is so hilarious. The word "thing" is a profound philosophical term. And we're talking about Doorway to Artistry, correct? My book.
Correct. Yeah, Doorway to Artistry. Yeah.
Through that book, I decided I better capitalize the word just so people would see it.
Right.
And so we can't even see the orientation we dwell in and attend from. And so philosophy, I think, is to help us do that, so that we can, attend to it therapeutically to fix whatever what's wrong with our default. Nothing wrong with the default. But if you got defective presumptions, it skews everything. So anyway, thank you. It's very encouraging. A couple of my books I've gotten to teach every semester. Mm-hmm. But not Doorway to Artistry. I just haven't had that experience. So it's wonderful to have this conversation, and thank you for your affirmation.
Well, I hope you do get a chance to teach this one at some point in the future, because I think it's excellent. It's kind of exactly what in many ways it was exactly what I expected, having read your previous work, because I think you've always been operating with this implied. This metaphysics has always been implied, right, by the epistemology you were working with. So it doesn't really surprise.
Thank you for saying that too. I do feel I can look at my manuscript, whatever I'm working on, and think, my golly, I said this 20 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Got this, and that's the whole way that subsidiary focal integration works. It's like it's a fresh integration deepens and opens you to a deeper reality of the same thing, seems to me. So every book is a step. It's not the final word. It's a doorway to open to a new place in the world,
Which, would you like to speak to the way that you have outlined the book? You've done it as if you were kind of inviting people into your home and like kind of taking them into different parts of your home as you go through the chapters, and so there's this real focus on hospitality.
Yeah, you keep talking
in the very structure. Go ahead.
You keep talking while I go grab a copy of my book.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I'm just wondering, like, what inspired you to take that kind of approach, to kind of lay it out that way.
Here I am.
Yep.
Yeah. So
yeah, the question is just like, I thought it was a really interesting approach, and I was just wondering what inspired you to take that approach to it.
Well, I'm showing you the book because it's so pretty. And
yes, it is.
And that is my house. And I wanted a philosophy book with pictures to make it a hospitable event. So, for example, this is my kitchen. And so each of the chapters is a place in my house. So, yes, I tried. I don't think I can, because of my philosophy, I don't think I can write books that are information. So I need to write books that are events.
Okay.
So I was a little bit more intentional in that respect. Plus, as you'll maybe know from Loving to Know, my ultimate injunction is to invite the real.
Right.
Which I think is true, and I love it. But where I come down at the point that I write Doorway to Artistry is that the real invites first. And so that's welcome. Right. And so I wanted that, this is my timid adolescent onset skeptic, first steps into like metaphysics, and I'm even calling it a metaphysics of childhood,
Right. Yeah.
But I that's what I wanted to get at, so there's, a reality part and a knowing part of the book, but this is the first time I foreground the reality thing. And right. I want to say, look, the real signature is that it overtures, that it hospitably welcomes first. And so our artistry, along with our pursuit of understanding, is hospitable reciprocation. So I was on the way to that when I moved to this house, and the house kind of walked in and took over. And I've always felt about moving to a new place that the house welcomes me. And it often heals me. Obviously when you've gone through a move, you're all unsettled and, at loose ends and sixes and sevens. And it was a big transition for me. It coincided with my stepping away from full-time teaching to an emeritus status and moving technically 3 states away. It's only 45 minutes from where I used to live. This is Ohio River Valley. But so what? I don't know. The house just became the metaphor that I wanted for the book. And actually, when you look at all my books, there's some picture, some motif that anchors and drives the whole thing. So
Have
it's the auto mechanic.
Have you read Susanna Clarke's novel Piranesi?
I did. I found it really unsettling.
Oh, really? That's interesting, because I actually kept when you talked about that, when you started talking about the way in which the house was welcoming, I immediately thought of that novel.
Well, good for you.
because in Piranesi has this sense of like this strange house that Piranesi is in, of welcoming it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, somebody did, give me their copy of the book and say it was just my work, but
I would say it's Barfield, but I think there's a way. It's Barfield. It really is Barfield.
Yeah.
But Barfield really does connect well with what you're doing. Like your Barfield's ideas about participation and your work are very aligned.
Well, you could teach me a course on that too, and I
actually brought up your name. I did a conversation recently on Barfield. Someone invited me on their podcast to talk about Barfield, because I'm known for talking about Barfield a lot, and he asked me of contemporary thinkers who will align with Barfield, and the two names that I named were you and Ian McGilchrist. So
yeah. Well, I'm on a quest. I mean, I've spent my life on a quest, but in the a recent version of it, I've been pursuing what I'm calling my English Christian heritage.
Yeah. Okay.
And my grandparents were from Somerset, and I'm so intrigued about that, and so that's why actually I've read multiple Arthurian presentations in the last 2 years.
oh, that's fantastic.
Because I'm after Logris or something.
There you go. Yeah,
reading,
absolutely.
The Inklings, and I got to visit Oxford last year and Cambridge this year, and I've been on kind of a quest. I'm sure you know and love Malcolm Guite.
Oh, yeah, I had Malcolm on the channel not too long ago, and we talked about not surprisingly. I had Malcolm Guite on Grail Country. He's working on an Arthurian cycle, so we talked about Arthur and the Grail the whole time.
Well, I had lunch with him when I was in Cambridge. I was so honored, and but I spent a lot of time talking with him about Harry Potter, because I really think that's so Arthurian, and and I wanted to know. So, what is?
Well, you can't read. I mean, Rowling.
I see it now in the whole world of wizardry that's hidden among ordinary life. And then I realized just yesterday, I was reading again about how for C.S. Lewis, what was the birthing idea for Narnia was this image of,
yes, that's right,
of a fawn. With
fawn under the lamppost,
and the lamppost, and I realized that too. It is that hint of Logris in the ordinary world. So the juxtaposition, you think of diagonally. I'm going to shut this window because the sun or the curtain. Hang on,
no worries.
I'm about to get blinded here. But to have this sense that your world is one in which some little door might open and some unusual enchanted thing might come in, like you would walk in a wood and find a fawn.
Right.
There's something about that seems English to me.
Yes, I think that's true. It's just it's a sort of it's this different sense of the faculty of the imagination that you kind of that is very much a part of a kind of English tradition that goes back to Coleridge, and definitely is like, and you see it in George MacDonald, you see it in the Inklings, you see it in Barfield. So yeah.
Here's my question that I would like to work out. And it is that that because I'm kind of my epistemology always will have this Michael Polanyian subsidiary focal integration in it. Imagination is built in the heart of science.
That's right. Yeah.
And I feel as if, and as you know, I take this approach with Doorway to Artistry too. Here's one thing that philosophy can do for artistry, and that is fix everybody's epistemology. The sun is still coming in. All right.
Oh,
all right. There we go.
There we go.
Because it's not the case. Artists, all artists, lots of artists are liable to say, I have to set reason aside and embrace imagination. I'm saying, no!
You're right. Yeah.
We want to say science needs to set reason aside so discovery can happen. So if you look at the act of coming to know, it maps onto an artistic act, just totally right. So I guess I wish that some of those inklings might have had a conversation with Michael Polanyi when he moved there in 1959 until his death. He was at Merton. He came to Merton the year that Tolkien retired. So who was he talking to?
Yeah. I think Barfield was familiar with Polanyi. I'm pretty sure that I've encountered a review.
Yeah, there's
that Barfield wrote.
Written that, and I did reach out to those guys and ended up with it's pretty funny when you get an email from Owen Barfield, but that's the grandson.
Yeah, right. Yeah, Owen A. Barfield. Yeah. Yeah.
They said that they had no record.
Oh, okay.
Of a connection, but a sense of a
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Go to understand. And I guess I just think, I hear a word like participation, and I think, okay, what is that, right? Thinking I gotta figure out what this word means. But Polanyian subsidiary focal integration just seems as easy as riding a bike.
the reason I like Barfield's use of participation is that it links us directly back to traditional Christian metaphysics when you're talking about participation. So that's why I like that particular term. Because it has a long history.
All right. Well, I've got a ways to go then. But I'm working with the transcendentals.
I think you had a conversation with my friend John Vervaeke, who is he's an interesting he's a cognitive scientist, but he's also a Neoplatonist, and he also talks about participation and participatory knowing a lot. And I think that I don't know if I think there's a lot of alignment between what Vervaeke's talking about in participatory knowing and in what you're talking about with your work in Polanyi's idea of subsidiary focal integration.
My colleagues in the Polanyi Society talks about how people talk about different kinds of realisms. Well, he uses the word participative.
Yeah, okay. So let's talk about the real in your book here, and it's interesting. It's early on, it's this is early on. It had the sense of this so implies a kind of Trinitarian ontology, already, and before you actually got into talking about love and perichoresis and its connection to the real. And then I got to that part, and you're actually going, oh, okay, now you're actually using Trinitarian language to talk about the nature of the real itself. And it seems to also have, because you continually talk about the person-like nature of the real.
Yeah.
And because of the way that you connect loving and knowing in your previous work, and the way you talk about love in this work, there's a way in which what you're talking about is fundamentally agapic in its structure.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. So it is agapic. It is agapic and inviting an agapic response.
Yeah. Yes. Yep. Well, you know, so I have always been in a Bible believing tradition of some version or other, and when in Longing to Know, that's a book written for people considering Christianity who have questions about knowing, which was me. So it's, me justifying my own Christian belief to myself. I needed to know about knowing. But then as I was trying to describe it, as I tell in Longing to Know, it became apparent to me that when you do make contact with reality, at that point I was saying reality contacts back, and so it's like a person walks into your life. So as a Christian believer, it was pretty obvious that the most real thing, period, is persons in relationship.
Right.
I mean, you can't just say person. You got to say persons in relationship. And that means that if any philosopher can tap person-likeness in knowing and the real, it's a Christian believer. I think it's the coolest ever philosophical source in the world. So I didn't set out. I've never been. I've never seen myself as doing theology. I've been trying to make sense of ordinary life, and I always feel I want to welcome everybody into that. I don't want it to be an inside conversation because I think because of my doctrine of creation. So it seems so obvious to me whether evolution happened or not. That's not the question. The fact is you don't have a reality unless somebody says, let there be.
Right.
Which is verbal, covenantal, and love. Right. So the structure, it should be a covenant ontology.
Here's the thing though, but if you could get someone to come to an understanding of the real that has these person-like attributes, right?
Yeah.
And the nature of it is love, then all of a sudden Christianity seems to just mirror the structure of reality, right? Yeah. So it's like you don't have to hard sell the propositions of Christianity.
That's right.
Get somebody to see the real as being, person. Exactly.
Apologetic approach.
Yeah,
which is I call it disarming.
Yes, precisely.
And I want my sense of my account of knowing and my account of reality to themselves be forms of the implicit love of God, as I say in Loving to Know. Yeah. So there's the knowing itself bears witness, and reality itself bears witness, to the Lord. To the Lord.
And when we're on the right path with whatever we're pursuing, our actions start to mirror the source.
I hope so.
Well, that's the idea.
It is the idea. But here's the lovely thing.
Yeah.
Thankfully, the Lord doesn't always call a spade a spade. Meaning you can be totally wrong-headed in what you think you're doing and stumble by God's grace, stumble into insight. Right. So I worked with theologian Mike Williams when we actually were inventing covenant epistemology. He would say to his classes, how much theology do you have to get right to be a believer?
Right.
And then he'd answer his question and say, not very much.
Right. Yeah.
But that's not about you. That's about him.
Right.
Because there's a kind of a peaceableness about your errors. Not obviously that doesn't let us off the hook, but when reality breaks in, it can do it kind of irrespective of your cluelessness.
Right, because it's more about participation in the right pattern than it is about
And
having the right ideas.
Do you like the word encounter? I mean, I like
Oh
the
yeah,
word encounter. So
love the word encounter.
if that's what you have in mind by participative, I like that encounter idea because it gets at communion, it gets at the face-to-faceness of it, the intimacy of it, and unlike subject and object, you talked earlier about the problem with object versus thing. It takes both sides of it, but it takes both sides of it as persons for there to be encounter. So
For the sake of my audience,
oh my
would you
God.
mind talking? It's bound to have a halo with Esther.
I keep moving around my office. Sorry.
No, that's okay. So just for the sake of my audience, would you like to go into a little bit more about that distinction between, like, what is the difference between an object and a thing?
Okay, I'll try.
Okay.
Actually, I have a new book coming out that grows out of Doorway to Artistry, and it's going to be a little book, I think. You don't exactly.
You never know until it's done.
It's at the publishers right now getting worked over. It's called The Mother's Smile. And the subtitle is...
I love that part of the book, by the way. That was wonderful.
Yeah, well, that's what it is. And then the subtitle is Philosophical Formation in the Welcome of Mothers and Friends.
Okay.
And so you can see, obviously, having read Doorway to Artistry, what I'm up to. The only thing that isn't in Doorway to Artistry particularly that I draw out in The Mother's Smile is just to name how it is that mother's smile forms us philosophically, with regard to our sense of our own existence, with regard to our sense of what good knowing is, with regard to our regard for the other, and with regard to our sense of reality, and not to mention our sense of the face of God. So, the glorious Balthazar quote that, the promise of the mother's smile is fulfilled only in Christianity. I mean, I want a t-shirt that says that. That's a t-shirt quote. That is just fantastic. But then I also make the point that the operative friends in our lives sustain and mature the same ministration.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to see ourselves being seen in the regard of the other, the noticing regard of the other. So in that, I engage more the work of Robert Spemann, who is a recently deceased German philosopher that I only know because of David Schindler, whose work I just, keep trying to understand and grow in. It's like the guy that I want to read. And Spemann has an essay. So the Schindlers, Jeannie and David, translated and edited a volume of Spemann essays, a reader. And so one of those essays in there is called on something of anthropomorphic or anthropomorphism. I can't remember. On being anthropomorphic, something like that. Right. So that's the main thing that I interact with text. And what he says is modernity has objects.
Yeah.
And what an object is actually a mental product.
Right.
So as opposed to, and so to the question you asked me, a thing would be there, and in my case, I'm saying it's overturing. It's saying, here I am, to which I respond hospitably in noble courtesy, a la the dwarves, so the dwarves at your service. So that's what I hear when you ask me to distinguish between object and thing. You might want to add to that.
No, I think that's good, because it's like there's like you're taking all the person-like attributes that happen in any ordinary encounter with the real, and you're just extracting them out in creating the object, like in creating an object. Like an object is always completely de-anthropomorphized, dehumanized. Like
Right.
it's like it and I think,
and it's the product of your abuse and greed and all of that too. You know,
right? Yeah,
your
yeah,
desire for control and mastery. I mean,
yep,
you can go on.
yeah, right, yeah.
But you know, I think people need a long time thinking about that.
Yeah.
Because we're so inured. We're so inured in a way of seeing the world.
Yeah.
Like what? Now back to Narnia.
Okay, let's go back to Narnia.
so here's the thing. I think some people, persons of faith and art, can and others can say, okay, how do we compensate for this world of objects?
Right.
Okay, so let's insert a faun, which is a magical being. And I guess I humbly submit that you and I, let's picture that red wheelbarrow and the chickens and the faun beside it. I think what the real show is saying is we don't need the faun.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's right. That's right.
We don't need the faun metaphysically.
Right.
Because reality is drop dead awesome out of the mouth of God.
Yeah.
It's both ordinary and unbelievably stunning.
The magic is already there. We just have to have eyes to see it.
Yeah. So I don't need to enchant by adding another world.
Right.
Now, I love C.S. Lewis and Tolkien and all of that, but and that thing, you can see it's totally intriguing me, right? In following my English Christian heritage. But I also I just want to stand for the doctrine of creation. I mean, Genesis 1:1 is the most astounding verse in the Bible.
Yeah. I think one of the things that makes that makes the writing of the Inkling so effective is that it does actually always return back to the magic of the ordinary. Right. Think, for example, of the scene in the Narnia books where Beaver serves up a simple fish dinner to the kids, right? Like that. So it's like there's as much magic in that as there is in the image of a fawn under a lamppost. But you have to have both things in the text in order to get that connection. I think that's what's going on with the Inklings, is that they're using this extraordinary and this magical, but it's also infused with this sense of, like, look at the way Tolkien talks about trees, for example, in Lord of the Rings, right? I mean, wow. Yeah. So it always comes back. It puts you in a magical world, but it also shows you the magic of the ordinary at the same time.
Yeah,
while it's doing that.
Yeah. I think you're right. I just think for some people it's misleading.
Okay.
And it bypasses the need to fix your epistemology and your reality, your account of the real. Right. So it comes to feel like a bit of a high-handed baptism because of a presumed belittling of creation.
Gotcha.
And so I'm a little uneasy, for example, with the term sacramental ontology.
Okay.
For this reason, because sometimes I feel like this ordinary world gets downplayed and compensated for out of the gate, and that just I'm sure there's, I don't know, it's just one thing that I'm seeing, because it just seems to me that
And yet at the same, that's interesting that I want to get into this because you talk about communion being essentially the point, right?
Yeah.
In your book, right? But the idea of sacramental ontology makes you somewhat uncomfortable. I'd love to see you kind of like.
That's a great point.
If you can articulate the difference between the kind of understanding of communion that you're driving at and something as that really is like the idea of sacramental ontology. First of all, that just as a term, that's already way more abstract than the idea of communion.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah.
Right. Communion is a more concrete concept by its nature than something like sacramental ontology, and I think it's the word ontology that makes it more abstract. And the sacramental is kind of an evasive term too. We don't because it kind of throws things out of it kind of throws things more into the realm of subjectivity.
Okay. Well, one thing? Yeah, you're right. And okay. Yeah, so let's say I start with the word communion and see communion as paradigmatic and actually a best epistemic practice.
Right.
It ought to make you better at your golf game. But I guess the next step I make from there is welcome.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess I don't need the word. I guess I think all of creation is revelatory.
Well, is it okay? Let me come at this in another. Let me come at this in another way.
All three things that are sacramental.
Right. Okay.
And so the sacrament is specifically designated by the Lord, you know, as a means of grace, all of that, and so, but I feel like people that's their recourse because they haven't thought about creation. I mean, you think about the fact that everywhere your eye lands, this is the word of the Lord. I'm not sure that self-revelation and sacrament are the same thing.
Right.
And everything reveals the Lord. Everything's the word of the Lord, but it's got an ownness to it because he's so generously self-diffused to give it away. Right, so it can be its very own self, and to put the word sacramental on it seems like a compensating spirit.
Yeah, I think it introduces some of the less productive ways that we think about sacrifice that take us away from the idea of sacrifice that God has. That's what I would say.
I'll say that again.
Okay. So I think that when we say something, when we use the word sacramental, that we can bring to that like associations with sacrifice that is a different sense of sacrifice than what God's idea of sacrifice is.
Okay, add a second sentence.
And so I think that if we have the wrong kind of sacrifice in mind, then it loses that gifted nature that you're talking about. Because there's a way, like take a look at our English word sacrifice, right? There's a way in which if I'm going to sacrifice something, I have to have implicit ownership of the thing that I sacrifice. Because it's not really a sacrifice if I sacrifice something that doesn't belong to me, right? If I'm sacrificing something that belongs to you, it's not a sacrifice at all. So there's an implicit ownership. But that's not but God's sacrifice, there's never any implicit ownership, because even though God is, like, by any logic, like by rights the owner of all things. He doesn't claim ownership of anything. He gives it all away freely.
Yeah.
And that is like that gifting away of all freely is the nature of what divine sacrifice is. So it's actually the complete inverse of what we can end up thinking of in our human ideas of sacrifice. So when we use an abstract term like sacramental ontology, there's more potential for confusion than if you use a simple word like communion, because here's the thing about communion is very unique, right? Because communion is an act of consumption where nothing is consumed. Like there's no it actually makes everything communion. In the act of communion, there's a consumption that makes everything more.
Oh, that's lovely.
Without the absorption, because in a normal act of eating, right? In a normal act of consumption, what I eat is absorbed into my body, and it just merges with my body and helps to, make my body grow, right? And if I eat, the more I eat, the more my body grows, it turns out. Not necessarily in ways that I want. But in communion, nothing is actually consumed, even though I'm taking it into me. It's not actually an absorption because it initiates a transformation.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So would you distinguish? Would it help to distinguish? It seems to me that in the cross,
yeah,
that is God's sacrifice.
Yeah.
But in creation,
and for St. Maximus, that's actually creation.
What's that?
And for St. Maximus, it actually is creation. Maximus has a line that creation happens at the cross.
Well, I guess I feel uncomfortable saying that creation was sacrifice.
Okay, go on. I think that's very good. That's very good.
So I feel a little bit of a distinction.
Right. And you can see this in the difference between the Christian creation story that we have in Genesis versus pagan myths, where the origin is clearly a sacrifice, and it's a bloody sacrifice, right?
Right.
But but the story that we have in Genesis is completely different. So I think that's right. So go ahead, please continue.
Well, I think I'm done, except to say there's just some nuances about the doctrine of creation.
Yeah.
And the distinction with at least the work of the cross. And it seems to me that I want to keep sacrament. And I know they both start with sac, but I think they probably have different roots, sacrifice and sacrament. I mean, sacra must mean holy, right? Like sacred, but sacrifice, I would have to, I don't think that I'm not sure that those are connected.
You're not sure that the etymology is the same.
Right. But in any case, the distinction you and I are kind of groping toward, I think, goes with my sense that I want to keep the sacrament for these cool things that the Lord instituted.
Right.
Church. And
so you'd rather it just refer to the sacraments of the church rather than to okay.
Whereas, there again, back to, wherever my eyes land, this is the word of the Lord. Well, we do distinguish between special and general revelation.
Right.
We use revelation for both. I mean, everything that exists is the word of the Lord. It's the here I am of God, right? It's the let there be. It's all his word of consent that gives itself away to be things in their ownness, So anyway, I'm always looking for the ordinary.
No, I think that's a good instinct.
Cool, it's cool philosophically, and it's cool biblically. but maybe not in the way that you're thinking. Not you, but
Right.
because
I understand.
I think a lot of believers just haven't done philosophical work, and quite honestly, a lot of philosophers, as far as I can tell, have not particularly addressed this in a way that was helpful.
Right.
But I always feel like if you stopped talking and thinking and you went about your life, that would be good philosophy. I mean, how else are you going to garden?
Right. Yeah.
And it's so fun. I mean, it's just about loving reality into being, and it's more in its possibilities and all of that. Just because the ordinary is this lovely, wondrous, philosophically profound, endlessly, just endlessly cool.
Yeah, it's already enchanted.
Yeah, except I don't want to use the word. I kind of don't want to use the word enchanted because
Well, though. But here's the thing. Okay, that's something I do know. That is a word I do know something about the etymology of. And
okay,
so
good.
I think enchantment in its original sense, the original sense of the word enchantment is like to sing into being. Like that's what it is.
Yeah.
And I think enchantment in that sense of like.
Yeah.
To sing into being is like, and I think that's like everything is enchanted, and we are called to further enchant it.
Yes,
by letting it be. By the way,
yeah, and letting
by letting it be.
So I'm no expert. I haven't read so much of Rowan Williams, but in his book on art, which hasn't got art in the title, it's something like Grace and Necessity. His account, I do this in Doorway to Artistry. He says things are more than they are.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. So, okay. I hear what you're saying about enchantment. And I guess that underscores that my problem isn't so much. I mean, I totally agree with what you said, but I feel like people talk about enchantment like there's something lacking in reality.
Yeah.
And we need to baptize it.
Right.
With religious stuff. And so many people too are connecting imagination with the Christian faith.
Right.
As over against reason. And I get antsy when there's these false dichotomies.
Right.
It's just
as if reason and imagination were somehow not compatible with one another.
Right. Or, as if reason as properly defined is absent imagination.
Right.
When at the heart of it, it has to be.
Right.
So, I feel like you've got co-opting of some religious terms that then presume the inferiority of what you began with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. I'm glad to have this conversation with you. Thanks.
No, it's really great. I actually went lots of places I didn't anticipate going. It's been fantastic. Yeah.
All right, maybe you better say other places you did think you wanted to go.
Oh yeah, I know. I have like. Let's see. I think I brought up most of the things that I was interested in. Did you have any questions for me, Esther?
Oh, I'm just I'm so glad to get to know you and hear
likewise
the beginning of what you're about. But I'd be happy for you to tell me more about, your venture in life and your kind of your.
Sure. Well, I think okay. Let's see. I came to skepticism earlier in life and more naturally, I think, than you did, and I had a much longer road to come back to faith. I was never an atheist, though. Interestingly enough, I was never an atheist, but I was a very very arrogant and convinced agnostic. And as an undergrad, I spent some time at Thomas Aquinas College. And we had this older
neighbors are graduates. Several of them are graduates.
Yeah, you live in Steubenville, right? Which I actually applied to transfer to Steubenville at one point in my journey too. So yeah, so I know Steubenville as well. But in any case, so I entered Thomas Aquinas College as an agnostic, and a pretty arrogant one at that. Because I was not just an agnostic. I thought that agnosticism was the only position that was possible.
Which is pretty non-agnostic.
And that anyone who wasn't an agnostic was just being intellectually dishonest.
Right.
Okay. And because of this misguided notion of certainty that just comes baked into the modernist cake. Because that, to me, the only knowledge was certain knowledge.
Right. Yep.
Which is based on a completely basically having no notion of the real whatsoever.
The real doesn't matter anymore.
Right, exactly right. And so the thing that kind of got me started on my long journey to discover the real was we had this older German Jesuit priest on campus named Father Gerard Steckler. And he had apparently been on the committee that read my essay when I applied to the college, because when he met me, what he said to me was, "Oh, yes, Nathan, you're the one who thinks he's an agnostic." And that statement just it just stuck with me. What does it mean? I think I'm an agnostic. Right, and that got me started reading. I started reading a lot of Lewis, a lot of Chesterton. I had a lot of people that were wonderful Catholic believers who were giving me lots of good advice as to what to read next, and I kept reading, and eventually I read myself. Later in adulthood, back into faith, with many bouts of agnosticism in between. And the thing that really, finally, for me, the thing that really got me to get it was when I encountered Barfield. So Barfield, that's why Barfield is such a guiding light for me, because Barfield is the one who finally gave me a sense of the real.
Wow. So would you, if I were to read one book or one piece by Barfield, I'm only saying
that's great. I'm actually going to recommend. A little work of his called "History, Guilt, and Habit."
Okay.
Because it's interesting because it's compiled from lectures that he gave, and because he's speaking in lectures, his language is much more plain, less specialized, and easier to follow. So I think it's a great entry point into Barfield.
Is it out there?
Yeah, you should be able to find it. I think it's actually on the archive online. You can find a copy of it online.
Okay.
And the paperback copies of it are not too terribly expensive if you want to purchase a physical copy. But it's not a very long book. I used to recommend Poetic Diction as the best starting point for Barfield, but I think History, Guilt, and Habit is even a little bit more clear. He kind of shies away from some of his specialized Barfieldian terms to actually, in a way that actually makes him clearer in his meaning than he is in some of his more specialized philosophical works.
I humbly understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that's wonderful to know, and that has everything to do with why you happen to be podcasting with me at the moment. Do you have a day job, or is this?
I do. I have a day job. So I am the public disclosure and discovery administrator for the Behavioral Health Administration of Washington State. So,
oh gosh, say that
yeah,
again.
a public disclosure and discovery administrator is my job title. So Washington State has a very complex and very very open public records law, and so my primary work is to supervise staff which is producing records for public records requests, but I also do work on discovery for litigation. So,
oh my golly, Ned, what's your what would be your official qualifications for such a job?
being smart and understanding how language works. I mean, really, I have a professional certification, but I didn't get the professional certification until I was already doing the work. So I just got, I happen to have like the hiring manager that hired me when I first started in public disclosure at Department of Health was just visionary enough to realize that I had an aptitude for language, which is kind of important to the job because you're interpreting laws, right? So basically, it's quasi-legal work that's done by non-lawyers.
Yeah, I see.
And so having someone with a good facility for language and understanding the nuances of language is kind of important.
Well, plus
because you got to interpret the public disclosure laws. So
right. Plus some like a creative organizational side too. Like you've got to collect and designate whatever and archive and whatever. Those little
absolutely. Yeah, I actually am the records coordinator in addition, and then I got moved into a leadership position pretty quickly in my public records career. Actually, I can remember. I moved from Department of Health to the Economic Services Administration of DSHS, and in my first one-on-one, they said to me, my supervisor said to me, "Yeah, we know we're going to lose you because you need to be a supervisor." So, and I think because here's the thing is I need it in order to pursue my career further, I'm the kind of person who needed to hear that because I am one of those people that is like a natural leader, but very reluctant to take the reins of power. Like, it's just not like I do everything I can to avoid it. And I needed to have a little bit of a push. I needed a little push, right? So yeah, that's my day. Yeah.
Well, I want to say your beard looks like my father's beard too.
Oh, well, that's cool.
Well, actually, you're strutting it a whole lot better than he did.
Thank you.
He didn't care as much as you obviously do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
Well, I hope this conversation continues in some form or other.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I would love to have you on again. I think it would be fantastic. It's been so lovely to meet you, Esther.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming to Grail Country and joining me today.
Yep.